In section 6, we'll continue with more numbers, shapes and notes. So let's start with 2, 3, 4. So we have the rainbow and the Melancholia circle. This was 2 spheres. This was 3 spheres. And then we had another circle here, which was centered on the center of the magic square. And this was 4 spheres. So we have 2, 3, and 4. The 2 and the 3 are conjoined in some way. And possibly the other one is linked, but I couldn't find that. I think if I'd rotated the Melancholia spheres, they probably would have come out something like this. So we have 23 and 4. I think this is 23.4. If I refer to this guy, welcome to the Golden Page, he researches this angle 23.4, and he finds a lot of doorways have this as the diagonal. And if you look to the right here, you'll see the Earth, and 23.4 is the tilt of the Earth. It isn't exactly that all the time. It fluctuates. It goes above and below it, but it is around that. And 23.4 is also 66.6, which has other meanings, not just the one in the Bible. It's closely related to the sun. And if you want to read further, Jane 108, he discusses 666. Let's go back to 234. So if we change that to 234 hertz, then we go 1 octave lower. So we halve that number, we end up with 117. And 117 is the background frequency of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. So it's possible that Durer is somehow referencing that. So let's go on to 30. So 30 is the angle related to the Durahedron, the object here. So we had a line coming down here, and then we had another one coming down here. And this angle here was 30 degrees, which is a dodecagon, a 12-sided shape. It's also an interesting angle related to time and feet and inches. So Robert Edward Grant has made a couple of amazing discoveries. One he shares with somebody in Australia. He found that if this is 2 meters across and this is 30 degrees, if you swing a pendulum, it swings back and forward. The length of arc exactly relates to 1 second of time. And what is more important and difficult for many to believe is that encoded within this form is metric and imperial. So these measurement systems have been around for eons, and it has been rediscovered recently. I'd just say, unrelated to anything I've done here, Robert Edward Grant has also uncovered that sound and light, one is longitudinal wave and the other is a sine wave, but he's found the mathematical formula to connect the two of them, which is still very little known in physics. So let's move on now to 2 cubes. If we take this line down here and draw it across here, and then we make that into a circle, it exactly makes another circle the same size. And then I'm assuming that Durer intended to do this. So he has 2 cubes sitting on top of each other. I've been looking for something called the Delian problem, which is from ancient Greece, where the Greeks kept losing their battles, and they went to the oracle at Delphi, and she said they need to double the cube. And what she was asking them to do was to work out the maths to increase the volume of 1 cubic meter to double the size of it. And the answer is the cube root of 2, or 1.259. So if this dimension here is 1, this dimension here will be 1.259. So I couldn't find it in the artwork, but I wonder whether this Durer is doubling the cube in his own way. And what is nice about this is that by making this structure, he has the first 6 square root. So if this is 1, we have the square root of 1. This would be this diagonal here. Let's do that. So this diagonal here would be root 2. This diagonal here would be root 3. This length here is 2, which is root 4. This diagonal here is root 5. And this diagonal here is root 6. So they're all coded within this structure by Durer. We'll move on to the last number on here. Let's just clear that, which is 137. So 1 over 137 is called the alpha constant, or the fine structure constant. This is known as the most important number in physics. It shows up continually in the research, and it relates to something I don't really understand, but it relates to whether an atom decides to expel an electron or absorb the electron. And I found this angle here is very close to that. I thought it might be 137.5, which is the golden angle, but it was much closer to 137. And this is a balance point, which is relevant to what I'll talk about in the third video. And I've just noticed I've skipped over 8 and 18, so let's go back to that. So let's look at this angle here. This was very accurate on the drawing. If I bisect these, then this forms an octagon. It's not quite drawn right. It would be off the top of the picture. But that is the 8, and the 18 comes from here. So this is very close to 20 degrees. So, and it just kept hitting the bell. I thought it might connect with the magic square, but it was really the bell. And I can't quite remember, but I think it also connects with this tongs as well. But I was fiddling things around, but what I found interesting is that if I drew a circle of this 18-agon, it touched here on the left, touched the octagon. So these 18 and 8 were very closely linked. And if I again refer to Robert Edward Grant, he talks about this combination of 8 and 18, how important that is. And this is another balance point, which again is relevant to the third video. And that's why I have highlighted that. So that's it with the numbers. In section 7, we'll look at why the artwork has healing power, as so many seem to claim. So let's begin with looking at Dan Davidson. Dan Davidson is a physicist. He's written a book called Shape Power. What Dan Davidson does is he measures the electrical field in two-dimensional shapes such as a triangle. There's a couple of things that I find interesting about his work. Is he says that you don't need to draw the whole triangle, you can just draw the node points. So instead of that, you can just draw that and it would have the same energy pattern. So to some degree Durer is doing this. He has the pentagram here. The bottom line of the pentagram seems to sit on some line across here. It's quite common in Renaissance paintings for the artist to break up the image in this kind of pattern. I haven't drawn it accurately, but it actually passes right through the eye of the dog. That crossing point is right in here. So at some level, the artwork is filled with nodal points which relate to geometry. And the other thing I find really quite fascinating is that he says that if you take a piece of paper and draw something on it, then he says there's a capacitance effect that occurs on the interface between the paper, which is one material, and the ink, which is another material. So it occurs along this interface. So it's a very small electrical charge. So if we think of the electromagnetic spectrum as a wave field, and right in the center is the visible spectrum, so we can only see that much of that band. So these are galactic and universal size waves right down to, let's say, atoms and molecules are in here somewhere. So these electrical fields are functioning at this level and smaller. So as this wavy line runs off to infinity, they could have a huge effect on much smaller particles. Next we'll look at biogeometry. This is closely related to the work of Dan Davidson. The difference is it is taken a lot further. Biogeometry is a science developed by Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who is an Egyptian architect and general scholar, writer, and much more. He works with shape and angle, and he shows how to do things with the shape and angle, whereas Dan Davidson is really recording that information. Dr. Karim holds patents on certain shapes which can enhance crop yields. It's a fascinating subject. So in reference to the Durer artwork, Dr. Karim's work is based around something that he calls BG3. And BG3 relates to three frequencies: higher harmonic of gold, higher harmonic of ultraviolet, and something called horizontal negative green. And when these three qualities are present, as they are in sacred sites and sacred buildings, they provide a harmonizing, balancing effect. But they can also be in everyday objects as well. and in two-dimensional art and shapes and forms. He's also found that they exist in certain numbers. So there's a series of numbers which start with 16, then we have 28, there's 19 is in there as well, 34 and 43, and it continues on. But I'm interested in 34. So if we go over to the magic square and we take the top row and we add the numbers, they equal 34. And the same across here, 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 down here, and so on, and diagonally as well. And the 4 central numbers and the 4 corner numbers, and there are many, many more combinations. So this magic square is full of 34ness, which means it's full of BG3. So that in its own would have a healing quality, irrespective of whatever else he's drawn on the artwork. The other thing Dr. Karim found is that constellations emit BG3. So assuming my assumption was accurate, this relates to Orion's belt, that emits BG3 as well. So let's go back to the magic square again. So if we take the numbers within the square, which are from 1 to 16, and we can take one pattern, which would be, say, n plus 1. So we go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. We've skipped 5 to 6 and 8 to 9, but I'm just trying to explain it simply for now. We can then take this pattern and treat it as some kind of fractal, which is a tiny part of something much larger. And we can make much bigger patterns. And these are starting to look like what are called cymatic patterns. This is a series of cymatic patterns which are being used by Stanford University in the treatment of heart cells. And they all relate to specific sounds or combinations of sounds. So the principle is the same, that the magic square is, in essence, creating these patterns. But because there are so many combinations within the square, it's vastly complicated. And we can also relate that to Islamic architecture. So if we look at these patterns here, all we need is the section. If we just know this here, we can then mirror that or rotate it and start to create the entire pattern. So this is what the Islamic scholars were doing. They were taking mathematical functions and converting them into patterns and sounds, which no doubt had their own healing quality as well. So finally, let's move on to the pentagram star. So in principle, we can see how these shapes and forms start to have a tangible effect. So the pentagram star is generally understood in witchcraft to be have protective qualities. If I refer to these images, the top is a Russian helicopter, the middle is a US plane, and the bottom is a Chinese tank. And they all have the pentagram star on them. So I think when I noticed this initially first, I was wondering how the star could repel bullets and missiles. But I think it works in a different way. If you imagine this equipment is on the base, and the soldiers are walking around and they're constantly seeing this image. So it's constantly going to the subconscious mind, and it's very likely resetting something, calming them, centering them, and making them slightly more focused in readiness for them to go out and apply themselves in whatever they're up to. So to summarize, Durer seems to have, on many levels, filled the artwork with shapes and forms and geometries and angles and patterns and numbers, all of which have inherent healing qualities.